G'day, my name's Lloyd Grolleman. I'm the Aussie pastor. Welcome to our program today. You know, my little brother Phil, he has a brother-in-law called Dave North. Unfortunately, a couple of weeks ago, Dave had a heart attack and he died. He left a wife and 2 kids. But before he died, he left this incredible story. It's his testimony about what God has done for him. Have a look at it. I think it'll move you like it did me.
When I was studying, I went through what I would call the typical rebellious, come out of a conservative Christian home. I'm living at university with no supervision, going from close parental supervision to none. And so I experimented with alcohol and some lighter drugs and thought nothing of it. I'm just doing the rebellious thing. Start teaching, that's all behind me. Little did I know the trap the devil had laid for me. Sorry, it brings up some pretty painful memories, but basically I was at home alone one night feeling lonely, and I thought, I remember when I was at uni I'd have a drink and I'd have a good time, so I'll have a drink by myself. And that started 7 years of alcoholism from that first night. I think I maybe drank 3 nights in a row and thought, this is ridiculous. I'm a teacher at a Christian school. This is wrong. But I just couldn't stop. And from then on, for the next 7 years, I battled to give that up and couldn't. And the amount, any of you know anything about alcohol, the amount you drink has to increase as you build up a tolerance to it. So I went from drinking, a third of a bottle of spirits a night to, 700 ml of spirits every night. And how I would know when to stop, because I should add, during all of this, I kept it a complete secret. Nobody knew. I'd always drink alone. The few friends and contacts I had, I cut off so that I could be alone. I used to manipulate situations so I could be by myself to drink. I was drinking at least 6 nights a week. But I'd have to get up in the morning and go to work and hide it. And so at night before I started drinking, I quickly learned if I drank too much, I couldn't go to work. You couldn't function. So I used to mark the bottle with a texter and go, well, by the time I get to this mark, I'm going to be so far gone, I won't know what I'm doing, but I know not to go below that line. And the line just kept going down the bottle until it got to the end where there was no need for a line. I'd just drink the bottle. And I'd know when I'd have enough, because if I went to bed and the room wasn't spinning and, I could still stand up, I'd go back out and drink some more. And I hated it. It was the most depressing, ridiculous, humiliating thing. I couldn't share it with anybody. And I just couldn't stop. For the life of me, I couldn't stop. And during that whole period, not once did it occur to me that there could be a spiritual side to that. I never once turned to God. Because through that whole thing, I was convinced I could stop. At some point, I would stop. And I would go for periods of, I think 6 months was the longest I went, where I could just through force of will not drink. But inevitably, you'd always go back to it. And the ridiculous thing, during that period, I actually got married. And during the whole courtship and engagement, my wife had no idea. I was married and still drinking, and my wife had no idea. I mean, after years of hiding it, you get so clever at it. And also, you're professing not to drink. So that
David, you're drinking these quantities being married and still...
Yeah. You build up a tolerance, Paul, and you can still function. When I was first started drinking, after at a period of 4 years, my legs recovered and I was able to play sport. I would drink half a bottle of spirits, then go and play a game of basketball. Ride a motorbike to the basketball game, play and come home, and I don't know if anyone ever knew. They certainly never said anything, because you build up such a tolerance. I'm married and drinking, and my wife doesn't know. It all falls apart when I get caught for drink driving. Still, my wife doesn't know, but the notice comes in the mail while I was away, and she got the notice. And that's how it came out. I mean, the marriage fell apart. Not immediately.
And not surprisingly.
And not surprisingly. We tried to work it through, and of course I claimed I would not drink again. I mean, part of the problem was her family drank. I didn't understand the problem. They didn't understand the problem. I do now. And if you're an alcoholic, you can't be near or with people that drink. So quit, they'd be drinking, I'd start again. And everyone assumes if you're an alcoholic, you can have 1 or 2 drinks, but you can't. If you have a drink and you're an alcoholic, that's it. You may have 1 drink on that occasion, but immediately you start scheming and planning for when you can be by yourself so you can get totally plastered. And when you're married, it's not a real healthy way. So eventually, when I say eventually, I think I was only married for 2 and a bit years. She found out. I tried to correct it, but I didn't know I was drinking. Denying to her I'm drinking. She knows I'm drinking. It's just nonsense. And of course she leaves. And as often is the case, it takes something that difficult to make you realise that you're not in control. And I knew from my upbringing that that God was the solution. I didn't really understand how or why, but I knew He was. And so, on the advice of some good friends, while the marriage was disintegrating, I booked myself into a psychiatric clinic to do a rehabilitation course. And I learned a lot about that. They obviously, I learned about my alcoholism, and then once my family knew, I learned about the family history of alcoholism that no one had bothered to talk about. And thanks. So through that course, I learned about I learned about it. It wasn't a Christian course, but during that they emphasised a number of things. They said, look, you're in here in this clinic. Once you get out, you've got a 10% chance of kicking this addiction. 90% of people won't. If you come back, if you run the course, it's a 4-week course. If you run the course and come back, then your chances of ever succeeding drop down to 5%. And I said, this is tough. And we're going to tell you, you will not beat this addiction without a higher spiritual power. Now, they didn't say what that was. I mean, they were saying, you can pray to a tree if you like. You can, I would...
Did you?
No, interestingly enough, I didn't. But they were saying, you need something outside of yourself. And I knew that was God. And so I started pursuing a relationship with Jesus. And I was committed to that because I knew I had to be. And God did cure that addiction for me. During that period of that revival, I also obviously was seeking God over my marriage because it went through a period of months where it was going to and fro, and I was spending time in devotion, studying the Bible, and I knew what God thought about divorce. And in the end, my wife made the decision that she'd had enough, and that there wasn't to be a reconciliation. And I remember really wrestling with God over that, saying, look, I've committed my life to you. You've forgiven me for these mistakes. You've cured this addiction. I know you hate divorce. What are you doing? Because in my mind, God was going to fix everything. And Paul, I've only ever heard the voice of God once, and that was on this occasion. Sorry. And so while I'm wrestling with God, I hear as clear as your voice. It wasn't, I'm sure if someone had been standing there, they wouldn't have heard it. It was in my mind, but it was an audible voice that said, everything will be all right. Now, of course, I optimistically thought, my wife's coming back, everything's going to be fine. Well, that wasn't the case. And I'd like to say that my relationship with God and my faith in that promise stayed strong, but it didn't. For the next 10 years, I kept going to church. I professed to be a Christian, and I was living a Christian lifestyle, but my commitment to Jesus and the time I was spending with Him gradually declined until after a period of 12 months, my devotional life was spasmodic at best. I was still going to church, and I guess I was back, my wife had left, I was by myself. At this point I'd left teaching and was running my own business. I was putting all my energy into that. It was going really well. I felt back in control. I didn't really need God anymore. And I want to come back to that. I want to reflect on that promise that God gave me and why my spiritual life, why my understanding of what my spiritual life suffered later. But just keep in mind that promise God made and the fact that I drifted away. And so for a period of 8 years, I'm throwing myself into my business. During that, after about 5 years, I met and married your sister. And I believe that was the fulfillment of God's promise. Everything will be okay. I now have a wife we are on a spiritual journey together. We've got 2 kids that we think are the best 2 kids in the world. I have I have the family that I always envisaged God would give me. It wasn't the way I thought it would be. So the interesting thing is God made that promise to me. And even though I wasn't faithful, even though I drifted away, he didn't. And it's a really important thing to remember, because I think sometimes we expect our spiritual journey to be one of feel-good emotions, where we will sense the Holy Spirit constantly. We will know what God's plans are. We won't go through periods where we struggle and question. Where we won't have to rely on God's promises, we'll rely on an emotional connection. And I've learned that that's not the way God
we just have to read the book of Psalms to realise the roller coaster ride.
That's not the way God has dealt with me. But the encouraging thing is, when God makes a promise, God keeps it.
Yeah.
And it's not dependent on how we feel. And fortunately for me, it's not even dependent on the works that we try to perform. It's based on his faithfulness. And I learned that from that promise God made. And anyway, so I'm married. I have a young family. My business is going really well. I get to the point where I think I've arrived at the point in my life where I should be content, where I should be happy. I have no financial worries at all. Everything is idyllic. For people looking on, I was able to present this picture of myself that was success. I've arrived. And yet, inside I was not in turmoil, I was just frustrated, deeply frustrated, because I'm thinking, I've done it all, I've achieved what I expected to achieve, and I'm completely unfulfilled. I know I'm not saved. I knew enough about that I didn't have that connection with Jesus. I knew I didn't have salvation. There wasn't a doubt in my mind. It wasn't because I was overtly evil. I just knew I wasn't saved. I had that conviction. I wasn't quite sure what to do about it. I wasn't at the point where I knew if I wanted to do something about it, because life was too good. And I wrestled in that place for about 2 years. My wife wanted a deeper spiritual connection. She kept pushing me, because she could tell that I didn't have that. She kept pushing me, and I didn't openly resist, but I just wouldn't do anything. I wouldn't commit. I don't know how to describe that 2 years of indecision. But at the end of it, I got to the point where I was desperate. I just knew I wasn't happy. And I started to worry about my children and their salvation and what part I was going to play in that. And I got to the point, God, fortunately, the Holy Spirit just kept at me and at me and at me. I didn't know what it was. This desire kept growing stronger and stronger, that I needed something. And I got to the point where I said, I knelt down, I prayed to God, and I said, all right, I've had this. I will pursue you. I didn't know what to do. And I wasn't asking people about it, because I'm still giving the persona that everything's okay. And then I stumbled across a series of sermons by a guy called Herb Larson, and he gave his testimony, and there were some similarities to mine, and he gave a solution. And he said the advice that, what I took from it, other people may listen to his series of talks and take different things, but what I took from them is, forget how you feel, forget what you want to do. If you are desperate for this relationship with Jesus, get up every morning and spend an hour a day. Commit that time to him and let him work in your life. And I thought, I can do that. And so I started doing it. I didn't feel any different. I just did it. And within a week and a half, my life just started to change. I'm sure people looking on were unaware of it. For me, all of a sudden, I started to develop a sense of purpose. I started to have my desires of the things I wanted in my life started to change. The way I spoke to my family and other people changed. Just little things started to change, and I knew God was working in me. And through that period, or not through that period, from then on, from that experience, that experience has been such a powerful thing in my life, that assurance of salvation, that purpose in your life, that knowledge that God is in control has just grown stronger and stronger the more closely I become connected with Jesus. And from my experience has been, it comes down to two things. How badly do you want it? Are you prepared to seek God with all your heart? And are you prepared to put your faith in Jesus and pursue him no matter how you feel? And if you do that, he will be faithful. He will find you and he will change you. I believe there are two spiritual powers at play. We're caught up in the midst of a gigantic spiritual battle. Sadly, we often are unaware of, and we dismiss the implications of that battle. We don't give enough credence to it. I believe there's two spiritual powers. There's God and there's Satan. And there's one or the other. And what we perceive as areas of grey is Satan being subtle. And I believe that the worldly media is being used by the devil to, at best, dilute our desire for Christ. I believe it's actually more powerful and sinister than that it's a direct spiritual attack. And all the devil has got to do is get a wedge between us and Jesus. That's all he has to do. That's his goal. Looking back, that revival was built around, what can God do for me? You know, I need God to fix my alcoholism. I need God to fix my marriage. And it wasn't a total surrender. It wasn't a total commitment. And I also didn't have the knowledge. So during that time, no connection with the world. My connection with the world stayed. I loved reading historical fiction. And I would spend 10 hours reading that to every 15 minutes I'd spend in God's Word. I loved watching television and movies, and my time was there, and I'm trying to maintain a spiritual life. And my belief is that one affects the other. And in fact, I'd be so bold as to say that the devil's influences through the world destroy your desire for your connection with Jesus. And Jesus requires a choice from us. And if we don't make that choice, the devil claims us by default. And I believe my spiritual experience or my spiritual revival dissipated because I allowed those influences to stay in my life. Thankfully, now I have an understanding of that. God has shown that to me and graciously took the desire away before he gave me the conviction. But now that I have that knowledge, I think it's, if people watching, if you're wanting this relationship with God, if you want to fast track the process, just experiment with abstaining from those worldly influences. Don't take my word for it. Try it. Just take a week off and spend a week. The time that you would normally spend doing that, spend that with God, just for a week, and you see in your own life the power that it has. And the last thing, I guess, if we've got time, I want to share with you is along these lines of surrender. I believe God is looking for people who are totally committed to Him. Now, I'm not putting myself. I'm not saying I've achieved some pinnacle of spirituality. There's so many things in my life that I'm continually having to surrender to God, and I'm on a journey like everybody else, and in so many ways, a spiritual infant. But the things that God is showing me are so I find so exciting. And when I say that, I mean God is showing me that He's involved in my life and He is directing my life as I surrender it to Him. And one of the biggest things I had to let go of was my financial control. God has blessed me financially, and I saw that as mine. God had given it to me. And I remember listening to a speaker who suggested that even our finances need to be committed to God. And I listened to him and thought, no, I agree with that in principle. I'm happy to put that to practice. I'll present my finances to God, thinking, that's fine, nothing will happen. So I run a steel wholesaling business, that's what I do. So I got down on my knees one night, didn't consult with my wife, which was a mistake. I think everything financial you need to do as a family. And I prayed to God. I said, look, God, I've got my business and I've got these properties. Anything you want, it's yours. All you have to do is send someone along to buy them at better than market rate. You know, I'm not going to advertise. You send a buyer, give me better than market rate. I'll take that as a sign that all of the proceeds from whatever you sell, I'm to put into your work. So I have a steel wholesaling business. That's what I do. And so I got down on my knees one night and prayed, God, send a buyer, thinking the worst thing God may take, I should say take, and that was my attitude. God may take a couple of properties, or all of my properties. It doesn't matter, you know, with the income from the business, I can replace those, and, you know, it's no problem. So I prayed the prayer. Now, I should just qualify this. It's a small business, a family business, like 16 employees. They're very difficult things to sell because you are so integral to the success of the business. So I'm thinking there is no way anybody's going to buy that business. It's a family business that's been around for 100 years, 99 years. In that 99 years, no one has ever wanted to buy it. 2 days later, I get a cold call from One Steel, who is the biggest steel manufacturer in Australia. The Queensland manager rang me out of the blue and said, David, would you consider selling your business to One Steel?
No way.
And I was terrified. And I knew him. We had
Why were you terrified, David?
because I had prayed that prayer and I knew I was convinced God wanted me to sell the business.
Were you terrified about giving it up? Or did you realise how much of your identity had been built around that business? Or
the prayer I'd prayed was that whatever God sold, I would give the entire proceeds to.
okay.
So I went home and I told my wife and said, oh, look, this is the prayer I prayed and I think God just answered it. And she wasn't happy. She said, well, what are we going to do? She said, well, and she starts to rationalise with me, well, you know, you said you'd give God the proceeds from the business, but, you know, you've got a lot of profit that you haven't taken out. We could take that out. And I said, no, that's not what I prayed. I said, whatever the business sold for would go into God's work. And so, and when you're dealing with a big publicly listed company, things take time. Like the whole process of, you know, confidentiality agreements, investigations, due process, took several months. And during that process, God took Karen and I on a journey where we went from terror to excitement, because we're both trained teachers, and we realised the opportunities God could have for us if we were freed from this tie, that we could put the money into God's work. We could go and we could be missionaries, we could be Bible workers, we could just full-time volunteer for our local church, and we're excited about it. And then we go right through that process, and One Steel, after investigation, said, your business is bigger than we thought, it doesn't fit the model we had in mind, sorry, we're not going to proceed. And then we're disappointed again.
David, what do you think God was saying through that experience?
I've no doubt what God was saying. God was letting me know that my life belongs to Him, my finances belong to Him, every aspect of my life He wants to direct. And He was taking the biggest chunk of my finances, which consumes the biggest part of my life, and He was letting me know that it's His, that I need to surrender that to Him daily. And Paul, my personal conviction is that Jesus is coming soon, and that we have a responsibility to share that message. And I have no doubt that at some point God will take all of my finances and I'm looking forward to that time. Until then, He's left me as a steward of that. And he, don't worry, he keeps demonstrating that to me. I had, not long after that, Karen and I felt, and now Karen and I both pray before we make big financial decisions together, and we both felt convicted to make a pledge to a ministry, a substantial one. And from the time we made the pledge until when the money was required was about 6 months. And during that 6 months, we went through the September crash last year. Business turnover dropped. I had other responsibilities I needed to meet, other commitments we'd made. And it appeared, I remember it appeared very difficult for us. I remember going home and talking to Karen and saying, look, I don't know how we're going to meet this commitment. If we do, it will be on borrowed money. So we're going to honour the pledge and then pay interest on it. I said, but what do you think? And we prayed about it, and we both believed that we had to honour the commitment. And so we did. And when we did, all these other financial factors fell into place. And all of the money that we gave was immediately came back into the business. I never once went into debt. I think for 1 month my overdraft tripped for a couple of days, and then we're back in the black. I couldn't have foreseen how that was going to happen, but God did. And it was just another, I believe God was just reinforcing what he'd shown me 6 months prior. Say, just relax, I'm in control. Let me go. And now for me, God had to show me that through my finances, but I think for all of us, there are areas in our life, I know there are. God is wanting us to relax and let him take control.
Well, David, where to from here?
If I could just encourage people that are watching, take God at his word. In Ephesians 3:20, he says, now to him who is able to do abundantly beyond what we can ask or think. Trust God, surrender your life to him, make that commitment to spend time with him. You will not experience anything more exciting or fulfilling. It is beyond description, and words fail me, but I can't recommend it highly enough.
If you like this program and it impacted you like it did me, I want to offer you the free DVD of it. In fact, contact us, no obligation, and you can ask for as many as you like. The reason I say that is because I want you to give them out, because this is what Jesus does when he comes into a man's life. Now, God bless you, David North. Rest in peace. I'm the Aussie pastor, Lloyd Grolleman. I love you, but you know what? God loves you a whole lot more. See you next time.